Hello and welcome to the Christian Study Abroad podcast, where we bring together leading voices at the intersection of Christian higher education and global ed and study abroad. My name is Greg Belgum, and I'm the Vice President of Living and Learning International and serve as the conference chair for the Christian Study Abroad Conference. Today, I am joined by Adri Fonteijn, the National Director of Study Abroad at Intervarsity Christian Fellowship. Today, Adri lives in Washington, close by Washington State University. He's been working in study abroad with Intervarsity since 2018, but prior to that, he moved to Washington State to launch an international student ministry at Washington State University. And prior to that, he'd come to the United States from Holland to pursue a degree in college counseling and student development at Azusa Pacific University. He moved to the United States as a 28-year-old. And it's been a joy to get to know Adri over the last little bit as we've had some conversations talking about the unique distinctions of working in study abroad, both within InterVarsity's context and the context of Christian higher ed that I find myself spending most of my time. So in today's conversation, we're just going to be unpacking a bit of what does InterVarsity Christian Fellowship do as it relates to study abroad. So Adri, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's a joy to be here.
Good. Well, hey, just to get us started, could you explain a little bit the scope of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship as a ministry?
Yeah, for sure. So InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in the United States started, I believe, in 1941. So it's been around for quite a bit. And we are present on nearly 700 campuses. Sometimes there's multiple chapters on those campuses. Like I started years ago in international student ministry, so there might be an international and then what we call multi-ethnic chapters and a variety of different ethnic-specific chapters. But 675 campuses, I think, we're present on. And that encapsulates about 28,000 students. So it's a sizable organization. What I also want to mention is like InterVarsity is part of something bigger called the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. And that is present in 160 countries. And so we really have 160 sister movements. They're sometimes called differently, but if you're in Canada, you might be familiar with InterVarsity as well, using the same name. But if you're in England, it might be Christian Union, or in some places it's GBU, which means University Bible Group. So not every country, but a lot of countries have their own distinct groups like InterVarsity.
You mentioned sister movements. In what ways are they connected today? Are those, movements like very centralized in their organization, or are they quite independent in how they're run and operated? Do you know?
I would say they're fairly independent, but they do come together every so many years. There's a World Assembly where people come together, and they do have like a vision and mission for that period of time. And then within InterVarsity, we have people working for what's called Link. And that's the link between InterVarsity and those sister movements. And those are like, I, for example, know two people in Barcelona who work for InterVarsity Link, and they support the local GBU sister movement. And so there's a lot of connections that happen. And of course, within the Ministry of Study Abroad, we also really depend on that and are blessed by having those sister movements.
That's awesome. Well, could we camp there a little bit on InterVarsity Study Abroad? What is the model? How do you guys approach study abroad within InterVarsity?
Yeah, so maybe a good place to start is maybe 12 years ago, there was no study abroad ministry in InterVarsity. And this is before I joined the team. But at the time, the person who became the director, Tom Sharp, looked around and noticed that study abroad was seen as a negative thing within our movement. What you have is a student, maybe a student leader. You're having hopes as a staff to continue to develop and to disciple this student. Maybe you want them to lead a Bible study next year, and suddenly he's gone, right? And he's off for maybe half a year or a year, off to Germany. And so you had these hopes, and then he comes back, and he didn't have a great time, like continuing to grow in his faith. And so now he might not be as much part of your chapter anymore. He might leave. And so some of the staff started actively telling their students, don't study abroad, right? This is negative for us. And we were like, well, this is such a missed opportunity. If we believe that God is a global God, he's created all people, and people experience God in different ways around the globe. There's opportunity, obviously, for mission as well. What if a student could go abroad and actually tap into local community? What if they could continue to grow in their faith, and we would give them the tools? And like I mentioned, we have all these sister movements. So the step one to find a local community, depending on where they go. I mean, our sister movements aren't in every city, in every country. But a lot of the time, that's a good starting point, right? We can even reach out. It's like, hey, this person is going to this city. Do you know of someone? Maybe not from Intervarsity, but maybe a church. So that was that first kind of like, I think we can connect students to local community as a step one. And two, we can check in with students, which that's where a lot of these things developed from, initially mentorship to having digital small groups. We did this before COVID when nobody knew how Zoom worked and they weren't burned out on it. I think we're now at a place after COVID when students are actually engaging again in that kind of way. But yeah, we have digital small groups every week where students from around the globe get together to, read the scripture, pray together, but talk about some of the challenges they're having, crossing cultures. And so this become really important pods or communities for these students.
Well, yeah, I mean, what a good way to leverage imagination for Tom to see something that had been viewed as a negative, which if you kind of drill down into your own world where you're like, hey, I've got my goals, I've got my mandate as a campus ministry leader to build up leaders on campus, you can kind of see how people would arrive at that conclusion that, hey, this is disruptive to the kind of the group that we're trying to build. But again, if you zoom out, you're like, wait a minute, what a cool opportunity. And I love how Tom kind of captured some of that vision. Okay, but today, so the two things I heard was get students connected with local community, and the second is check in with them while they're abroad through a variety of things, both digital and then in-person sorts of things. Would you say like those are the kind of the two primary pieces of what makes up InterVarsity Christian Study Abroad?
I think the first step that I found to be the most important is having an advisor call. We do a 30-minute call with a student, and we don't know where they're at. We don't know exactly where they are in their faith journey. We don't know what their hopes are. And we're just sitting down and we're planting little seeds, because a lot of the time students are going to study abroad. And again, this is like, I sometimes have to clarify that we don't have our own like providers or programs that we send our students on. These are students that in their university, they found out about this program and now they're going, right? And we're just trying to step alongside them in that faith journey. They have thought about things like, how am I going to get these credits? How expensive is it going to be? What are the sites I want to see? What kind of experience do I want to have? But even the most missional students who maybe like a few weeks ago were doing evangelism on campus, right? They're excited about sharing the good news, have often not asked themselves the question, how's God going to be part of this? Where is God wanting to send me? What does God want me to have this study abroad experience look like? So even just asking that question starts like a whole new kind of world for them. And then depending on what they're hoping for, depending on where they are in their faith journey, we have a variety of different resources. And a lot of those resources can be used for any student, but they might enter at a different spot. So for example, we have the Sent Handbook, which is a great resource that has both questions and Bible studies before you start, while you're abroad, and then also debrief of when you're coming back. What has God been doing? So yeah, I don't know if I'm completely answering your question. You could maybe direct me a little bit.
No, yeah, sure. I think even what you mentioned there, I'm trying to kind of really capture and understand the scope of kind of what all makes up InterVarsity Study Abroad. And what I'm hearing is a lot, even just the initial step of vision casting is such a unlock, and it's relatively simple. It's just like, hey, have you thought about this? But it probably takes a lot to get them onto that 30-minute advisor call. Once they're there, then there's some pathways to kind of invite students to consider for their time. And then while abroad, local community, through Link and other parts of the sister movements, as well as check-ins through digital small groups. I know we've talked about pilgrimages as well. There are short-term experiences that y'all put on.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. So I think having connections with students is really important, but doing that online, there's always something missing, right? Like even however good a digital small group goes, it's not the same as a replacement for in person. So of course, cost is part of this. So we can't do this everywhere. And what we have decided is where most of the students go, like live or study relatively closely together, those make most sense to have some in-person experiences, which is generally in Europe, and right now also in Japan. We do this, but Europe has just this, like, 60% of our students go to Europe. Countries are nearby; it's easy for them to get to a place. So we do two things. We do lunches. Lunches are kickoffs early on in the semester. We do one in Amsterdam and one in Barcelona, and that is really kind of like the next step after the advisor call. And it's that place where we say, one, we believe God is already present wherever you're going, even if you don't see him on campus right now. We believe that God has created everything. He's already doing a thing. And two, he's inviting you into something. We don't know what that something is, but we know he's inviting you into something. And that weekend is really just to kind of discover, what is God inviting you into? And even this, like, was in February, we were in Barcelona. Multiple students really came back with this, like, I am going to travel less and I'm going to connect the local community. Really, they came away with that, like, still, we don't want students to not travel at all, right? Like, I understand being in Europe, there's that opportunity to see places. But I've also seen that students who choose to be somewhat locally rooted come away with a much higher satisfaction. They have made friends, they have, and not just friends, they have made deep friendships with other people. And it's, yeah, when they come back, they just say, like, this is a really good, deep study abroad experience versus people that go and travel every week. There comes some kind of fatigue, there comes some kind of shallowness into it, and so their own satisfaction isn't very high. But anyway, that is one of the things we do during the kickoff retreat. And then this other thing that was developed, that started about the time that I joined the study abroad team, is our pilgrimages, like you said. And those are in particular locations. Like, it started with, I think, the Camino, which you and our listeners might be familiar with, in Spain, walking the last 100 kilometers towards Santiago, staying in little albergues, hostel kind of places. And so we started doing that. That was just a real great success, taking students away for a week. And so we started then developing other pilgrimages around distinct Christian experiences of other places. So, for example, Ireland, we do like around Celtic Christianity, and exploring some of the saints like Saint Patrick or Kevin or Bridget, and kind of going into their stories. And then another one was developed in Italy around Francis and Clare of Assisi. And so we go to the town of Assisi and then to Rome. And part of that is also comparing, like, Francis really wanted to live out and follow Jesus in as pure as possible way. And at the same time, you have the Catholic Church at the time really being about empire, right? And so you compare those two, and then it's not that hard to make and say, well, what does that look like today? Do we still have those dynamics, right? And so a lot of those are not just about, like, engaging Christianity of the past, but it's like, what can we learn from these Christians and apply to our own lives? And it is additionally an opportunity to invite a friend. A lot of the time, our students, they tend to at least say they're a Christian all the way to being super missional. But then we say, like, this is a great opportunity to invite a friend who's not a Christian. We found out that students who wouldn't be found in church would love to go on a pilgrimage and engage with some of these spiritual disciplines. So.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's on so many levels, right? This, especially that last piece that you're sharing about there, is this environment that's highly experiential, rooted in a place of significance, like Spain, Ireland, or Italy, to invite a friend to come along and to just say, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And probably most study abroad students are thinking about, what am I going to do while I'm abroad? Where am I going to go? What am I going to, and some, they got to generate their own experience. But for this, it's something that they can step into. What I love about what you're describing, and what's distinct from my perspective, it seems like, about InterVarsity study abroad, is that you said it. You're like, we're not running our own programs. These are services or wraparound services that are available to students that are going to any program. And so I think the numbers from year to year kind of fluctuate, but at the moment they're in the 250,000 to 300,000 students leave the United States to go study abroad each year. And the vast majority, and that's according to Open Doors data, and the vast majority go to Europe. And so a lot of those are coming from the institutions that InterVarsity has staff on. So could we swerve back a little bit to the top? You mentioned 675 campuses in North America that InterVarsity has some sort of
Mhm.
presence or movement, and about 28,000 students involved in those movements. And then kind of a subset of that are going to study abroad, and a subset of that are going to engage with you and your team. So could you talk a little bit about like what's kind of the scale on an annual basis, maybe that are students that are kind of engaging with InterVarsity study abroad?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mentioned this before, like COVID, of course, had a huge impact on our student numbers. I think before COVID, we had about 600 students going abroad, then it went down to literally zero. And then slowly worked its way up to, I was just looking at the numbers, 400 students last year. Out of those, I think 100 to 125 were actually connected with during an entire year. Semesters depend, like changes a little bit. Most of the engagements we do are students during regular semesters. So there are some study, like this is where definition of what is study abroad kind of comes into play. For us, like we really only able to be of value for students who study abroad during a semester. If they're doing shorter study abroad, it's often more programmed. It means like the invitation to be locally rooted is much harder. Summer programs kind of similar. Also, our sister movements tend to not be in session, if so to speak, during the summer, and so yeah, that makes it a little harder to help students. But we still do advisor calls for anyone. We have the Send Handbook resource I mentioned earlier. So there are still things we can do, but it's just not as much.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned at the top, or maybe even before we hit record, that you've been on staff with InterVarsity for about 16 years now. And so you did campus ministry for a time, working with students in North America. And now you're working with North American students as they transport to a foreign place. What is distinctive from your perspective around discipleship and spiritual formation as far as opportunities for spiritual growth and discovery that happens when somebody from North America moves from their home context to somewhere else?
Yeah, I think doing campus ministry here at Washington State University, which I did for many years, the nice thing is you're going through a Bible study together and you get to the place where you do application and students say, like, let's say the great banquet, right? Like, who are those people in the alleys, right? Who are the people that we're not seeing on campus? What are we going to do about that? And then as a group, you can decide and you can apply and you say, like, we're going to go and reach out to this particular people group on campus. And it all feels very natural. Like it's just kind of an extension of what you're doing. When you're on a Zoom call and you're having that same conversation, these students are not together and are not in a community that's physically together, right? They only come once a week together. And so trying to figure out like, how can you take application and like continue your growth outside of a group is much harder. And you kind of have to have students that are already bought into that. I think we do come to those places. One of the ways we've dealt with that is, and this is not our own invention, and I wish I could tell who came up with it, but to split up application into three different levels of spiciness. And so say like, if you really feel like you want to do a hot, like spicy kind of application, maybe share the gospel with somebody in your class, right? But if you want to go for a really like mild one, it might just be, I don't know, talking like with your mom on the phone about what you learned during this time. So we're trying to figure out like, how can we make application work through a digital space, which is just, again, it depends a lot on the students as well. It really helps that we have some. This is one of the reasons why we do these in-person retreats as well, is that when we get the one-on-one time with students, we can actually do a little bit more than just studying a scripture, but we can have an experience together, which often leads to more transformation and also helps us when we get back into a digital small group, like, oh, I know you, I've seen you in person, right? I haven't only seen you in 2D. And those are the things that do help when we talk about, discipleship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What sorts of, I mean, have you seen, and I'm sure you have, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but any students in particular that really have had like an aha moment when they were abroad where something really clicked for them in a brand new way about their faith?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many stories, and it's in so many different ways. Well, one of them is like this is a few years ago. A student in Portugal. I think I was doing mentorship with her one on one, and she was just trying to figure out how to trust God in this new space, but she was just constantly kind of afraid to take steps. And at one point, the entire electricity net in the Iberian Peninsula just went out, and she didn't have electricity. She couldn't use her bank pass. She didn't have internet. And initially, there was this freak out moment, and then just realizing like, no, the only if everything is stripped away, the only one I can trust is God. And that for some reason, like this is not us like doing that, right? This is God doing this in her life. But I think it changed very much her perspective of like where should I put my trust? And then after
Mm,
that, it was much easier for her to yeah, be more free about her faith with other people around. It maybe if it's more of an application, and I've seen this multiple times where students, like I have to think a few years ago, Eduardo and Billy went to Lubeck, Germany. um, I really thought both of these guys were amazing. They didn't really speak German, but they went out of their comfort zone and just connected with German speakers and just kind of stumbled through. And they did all that. Like I really enjoyed it when students put themselves out there, but they couldn't find an English speaking community, like a faith community. And so Billy just said, "Well, let's just invite everybody in our international group." And he just went on WhatsApp and said, "Everybody, like, come to my house." He expected a few students to show up, and his house was filled. I don't know how many people there
mm,
were, but he said there were people from the Middle East, people from Germany, people from other parts of Europe. And they're like, well, let's start this Bible study. And he thought when we started this Bible study, people will probably leave. And most of them stayed. And they had a Bible study the entire semester. And so, and those things actually happen with some regularity, and they're really fun. And a lot of the time, it feels more like a blessing for me to be part of that. I mean, maybe I don't quite remember how this went, but maybe I put a seed. Like I said, like, what about doing something like that? But it's in the end, it's the students who take that and God doing the transformation. And so I think a lot of the value of our ministry is simply sitting down with students, asking good questions. And most of that then kind of follows from that.
mm. I love that. I love that for a lot of reasons, but I think one thing that I'm struck by is um how distinct that experience is, even from some of maybe what I'm familiar with living and learning programs or other programs that are a lot more kind of a curated experience with kind of driving towards particular outcomes. And I think there's obviously there's a place for that, because you're saying, hey, we have got some defined outcomes that we're trying to pursue. We believe these kind of parts of the programmatic experience are going to help lead towards that, and we're going to assess, did we hit those goals and outcomes or not, if you're designing like an entire program. But what
Right.
you're describing is students they're out and they're independent, and they're on their own, and with some coaching and some mentorship and a little bit of guidance from somebody who's been there before, it can kind of um, put them in the driver's seat to think about their faith, think about Christian community, think about sharing their faith in ways that maybe
Mhm.
they haven't before. Um, so yeah, that story of those guys is awesome. Also, the story of the gal in Portugal. I think when you're abroad, something like losing power and electricity. I mean, that, for a lot of us, if that happened in your home, that'd be really inconvenient. But you're like, I'm not
Mhm.
necessarily scared, unless there's maybe weather concerns. But when you're in a foreign country where you don't speak the language, like that's legitimately like quite a scary thing. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, for her to step into that moment and have some of that.
Yeah, like there's one thing I want to say is this is something I only figured out several years in doing this ministry, is that well, one, the students that go tend to be willing to go out of their comfort zone. Sometimes their program tells them to, so they're already kind of a special bunch anyway. But it is an opportunity for them to figure out, how am I going to, for lack of better phrasing, be in charge of my own faith. And students, when they graduate, they will have to do that, right? They'll have to leave the campus, and they might not find a nice campus ministry where they're going. They have to figure out, how do I become part of a church that I know nothing about? How do I continue to grow? How do I get rhythms of faith by myself? And study abroad really, like specifically when it is a little chaotic, right? Like you just sometimes just being dumped in a place like Lubeck and you have to figure it out. And you're just like, I don't know how these things work. And with a little bit of help from us, they're able then to find a local community or start a Bible study. And it gives them skills to do that again when they graduate. If they don't, sometimes they just like, it was a really hard time and they kind of fail at that and they feel like, oh man, I really wanted it and I didn't get it. It's an opportunity for debrief and saying, okay, it didn't work out this time, but you have learned something. And by the time you graduate, you can take these skills with you. What would you do differently, right? And so it's a valued, like something I hadn't really thought about until I started doing this ministry, but I really see that this is something helpful for students in the future.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your voice in this conversation, sharing about, just the distinct opportunity that InterVarsity has in front of them as they're a part of these, 675 or ish colleges and universities in the United States, primarily public institutions or maybe not faith-based private, colleges and universities, serving a really different segment of college students in North America than kind of Christian higher ed is focused on. Evangelical Christian colleges that are kind of saying, hey, we're kind of clear on why we exist as an institution, around faith integration at the institution level, and that trickles all the way down to the students that are showing up. And so, I think there's what you're describing around kind of the sturdiness or the robustness of faith being developed through study abroad is absolutely the case with the demographic of students that you guys are serving. And I think that that's also the case a lot for students that have maybe been in a Christian environment for most of their experience all the way up until college. And so to try it on for the first time, to be on your own, to make some of those choices. They're probably not identical, but there's definitely some overlap there. So, well, Adri, thank you so much for time today. Just sharing a little bit of what's going on within the InterVarsity context, serving a different kind of segment of higher ed than maybe I spend a lot of my time thinking about and engaging with, but recognizing that the work we're doing is in many ways quite similar. And so, grateful for you to even share with this audience a little bit about the work that's happening at InterVarsity.
Yeah, for sure. It was my joy. It's and I appreciate you inviting me to share about this.
Cool. Well, hey, blessings to you and the ministry as you continue to support students. Thanks again for time. We'll talk soon.
Whether you're planning a study abroad course, service project, or mission trip, Fellowship Travel International is here to help. For more than 45 years, we've partnered with Christian universities and ministries to design custom faith-based programs from the ground up, supporting everything from flights to fully tailored itineraries in more than 60 countries around the world. Let's plan a journey that makes an eternal impact. Fellowship Travel, planning trips that change lives. Visit fellowship.com to get started today.